Good morning, dear participants. It is my pleasure today to invite you or welcome you to our session on sustainable trade and the green transition, building skills for fair, responsible and inclusive supply chains. At the face of the triple planetary crisis, we're looking at climate change, biodiversity loss and pollution. We see that the European Green Deal sets the path for the EU to turn into a sustainable economy. But this will require significant resources and especially skills when we are talking about the environment and addressing environmental risks in the supply chain. So in today's session, we will discuss the role of sustainable trade to address the green transition. We will stress how collaboration and continuous improvement is essential to build robust supply chains to address those environmental risks and support the transition. And finally, I will be very glad to hear from our practitioners from the private sector on how they are collaborating across the supply chain to address those challenges. Next slide, please. But firstly, and very quickly, some rules of the day. Please note that all participants are muted. However, we strongly encourage you to submit your questions, any burning thoughts and comments in the chat or the Q&A function of this session. And we will see to fit those questions into the later panel discussion as we see fit. And finally, please note that this session is being recorded and the recording and slides will be shared after the webinar. Very quickly on the agenda, I'm glad to have a well-balanced group of speakers. So we will start with a setting the scene presentation by Stuart Newman, Senior Sustainable Trade Advisor at Amfori. Then we will move to a keynote speech by our invitee, Delphine Salard, Senior Expert Trade and Environment at DigiTrade of the European Commission, who will set the emphasis or provide emphasis on the collective approach to continuous improvement and also discuss what the EU is doing at the moment to greener sustainable trade. Afterwards, we will have our Services Project Manager, Dominique Barria, who will provide a presentation of what Amfori is doing in capacity building. And then we will welcome our two practitioners from the private sector who will provide a testimonial from the EU and also Turkey on how they are collaborating and addressing environmental risks in the supply chain. And the final part of the session will consist of a 30-minute panel discussion where we will again feed in your questions. But without further ado, I would like to introduce the audience to our Senior Sustainable Trade Advisor, Stuart Newman. Mr. Newman has extensive experience in trade. He worked for the UK Government's Trade Department and also the European Commission's Trade Directorate on issues concerning intellectual property and market access from a national, EU and international perspective. And currently at Amfori, which helps companies address environmental and social risks in the supply chain. He is responsible for trade and customs issues with a particular emphasis on the role of sustainable development in international trade. So Stuart, please, the floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you, Amanda. Thank you for allowing me to speak today at this webinar. I'm going to give a very brief introduction to the Green Deal and how it connects with trade, at least as Amfori sees it. Now, of course, implementing the ambitions set in the Green Deal will require effective policy measures and a great deal of commitment. You may think that increasing trade with countries outside the EU, usually via trade agreements, is not the ideal way to meet those ambitions. However, for several years, EU trade agreements have included environmental as well as social requirements in the chapter on trade and sustainable development. amfori thinks that these can be used as an important lever in raising environmental standards and lowering the environmental impact. And this will be at a global level, or at least with those countries with whom the EU has trade agreements, of course. However, although these modern trade agreements include references to climate change commitments within those TSD chapters, as they are known, the compliance criteria sometimes is a little unclear. You could argue that there's a focus on the ratification of certain treaties and conventions rather than proper implementation. So for those TSD chapters, those trade and sustainable development chapters to be effective, the EU must closely monitor partner countries and their implementation of the sustainability commitments within those chapters, within the bilateral trade agreement itself. The Commission needs to be in regular and close contact with representatives in the partner country, and that includes not just the government, but also civil society, because very often civil society has good connections on the ground. They can see what is happening. They can see what governments are doing or not doing, what partner manufacturers are doing or not doing, how the workers and the people are affected. And so civil society can play a very close role. As some of you may know, that in that regard, we have domestic advisory groups, usually known as DAGs, and they do play an important role. Amfori sits on the Vietnam DAG, and so we can speak from experience. And those DAGs are part of, they're actually written into modern trade agreements. Civil society and people like the EESC get together and discuss how a country is involved or implementing and actually doing their commitments within each trade agreement. Of course, monitoring the uptake of commitments involving social conditions is relatively easy. After all, a country can change a law concerning workers' rights without too much effort, and the effect will be seen quite quickly. Once you change a law that improves social conditions, workers' rights, then the law is in place, and you can say immediately, more or less, what the change has been. But it's a different story when the environment is concerned, because even the most enthusiastic country implementing new manufacturing techniques, making pollution controls, is unlikely to see positive results. In other words, the effectiveness of those changes for several years. So it's difficult to see anything immediately. Now, the benefits of trade agreements from a purely materialistic point of view are very clear, because there is solid evidence that they result in increased trade between the EU and the partner country, and that corresponds to economic development. However, at the same time, there are two risks that go with this development. One is the resulting elevated production levels that are achieved at the expense of workers' rights. The other is that it can have a detrimental effect on the environment, such as clearing forests to make way for palm oil production, increased water usage for textile processing and the manufacturing of clothes, or the extraction and consumption of raw materials. So these need to be very carefully addressed when negotiating trade agreements. Now, the traditional carrot and stick approach may not work to prevent this, or indeed it might not be desirable. After all, the carrot, the increased trade, is already in place. The stick, which is usually the removal of preferences, might not be sufficient incentive for a country if the exports can be diverted elsewhere to countries that don't have sustainability requirements in place. And if they are effective, the resulting drop in trade could have a negative effect on employment. So we always say that the removal of preferences should be done as a last resort, even if they are justified. But in addition to these straightforward trade agreements, and of course I use straightforward in a very loose way there, and the preferences that they bring, we think perhaps the EU should also take a closer look at developing preferential trading opportunities for circular products and for services. It could support countries to transition to move from a more sustainable and circular economy, such as support the market for secondary raw materials. But of course, the major threat is climate change, something which is unfortunately looking more and more inevitable to continue. The COVID-19 pandemic could be a contributing factor to actually exacerbate that threat, because many countries were hit very hard by the pandemic, hit hard economically, and will try and compensate for that lost revenue by pushing hard on manufacturing. And of course, it's not fair to criticize them for doing so, but the end result could be that it will just increase the threat that climate change poses. So the best course of action, although it's by far not the easiest, would be instead to future-proof. And by that, I mean that countries that are likely to be hit the hardest by climate change are those already facing extreme weather conditions. And those countries happen to be those which very often EU companies source from. So producers in those countries will need to adapt their production methods to not just be more environmentally friendly, but to be more adaptable to a changing climate. So for example, producers who adapt their manufacturing methods to use less water should, in the future, be less affected when water becomes scarce as a result of climate change. But obviously, that's not going to be easy. It's going to require knowledge, resources, and skills that could be beyond what those producers have. Now, EU companies can play an important role here to assist their business partners. Indeed, it's actually in their best interest to do so. But of course, the EU, in particular the Commission, can also help, as can civil society and organizations such as amfori. Because working together, collaboratively, we believe that greener ambitions can be realized. And I think that is something that our next two speakers will address. So I hand it over to them. Thank you.
Thank you very much Stuart, for the enlightening presentation or speech, and for highlighting the opportunities and risks of trade policy, even when we're talking about more sustainable trade policy. And you touched upon a relevant point for this session, which is the need for resources, collaboration, and particularly skills, especially when it comes to addressing environmental impacts, which oftentimes require a very specific set of technical skills. Now I would like to pass the floor to Delphine Salard, Senior Expert Trade and Environment at DG Trade of the European Commission. Maybe as a brief introduction, Ms. Salard has plenty of experience in trade policy. She currently works in the team in charge of policy development and coordination of trade-related aspects of the European Green Deal, but also of climate and environmental policies at DG Trade. And she has a long-standing career in the European institutions, both at the delegation of the European Union to Canada, so playing an important role in the EU-Canada negotiations, but also as head of the Transparency and Evaluation and of the Internal Audit and Evaluation units in the Trade Department, and as an economist in the Directorate General for Economic and Financial Affairs. So the film will talk about the work that the EU is doing, and also the importance of partnerships to promote sustainable trade. So Ms. Salard, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Amanda, and thank you very much to amfori for inviting me to speak on that panel and for organizing this very, very interesting session. I'm not sure I will have much to add to the very extensive presentations Stuart already did, but let's try. So as President von der Leyen underlined when presenting the EU Green Deal back in 2019, and she called it Europe's man on the moon moment. The EU Green Deal is a package of policy initiatives aimed at transforming the EU into a fair and prosperous society with a modern, resource-efficient and competitive economy, ensuring no net emission of greenhouse gases by 2050, economic growth decoupled from resource use, no person and no place left behind. So therefore, the European Commission adopted in 2021 a package of legislative proposals to reduce net greenhouse gas emission by at least 55% by 2030. These autonomous measures, which are now being adopted by the Council and by the co-legislators, will transform how the EU produces, consumes, or invests. We are aware that in certain cases, these measures may also have an impact on trade, and we have taken considerable efforts to develop them in full transparency and compliance with the EU international commitments, its trade agreement. The European Green Deal measures are evidence-based, underpinned by studies, impact assessments, and public consultations, designed to apply equally to domestic and imported products in an even-handed and non-discriminatory manner. The least trade restrictive, not more burdensome than necessary, and include transitional periods for businesses inside and outside the EU to adapt, and wherever possible, based on international standards. So let me take a couple of examples. One regulation, autonomous measure that is attracting a lot of attention these days is the deforestation regulation. Deforestation and forest degradation occur at an alarming rate around the world, leading to climate change and biodiversity loss. 90% of global deforestation is driven by agricultural expansion. With the deforestation regulation, which will enter into force this month and into application N24, the EU wants to make sure that its production and consumption no longer drive deforestation and forest degradation in the EU and around the world. These applications will apply without discrimination to all relevant products, both imported to the EU and exported from the EU. I would like to underline again, sorry, I just saw that there was something on the chat, thought it was for me. I would like to underline again that there will be no ban of any country or any commodity. All producers meeting the requirements of the regulation, i.e. being able to certify that the products were deforestation-free and legal, will be able to sell their products in the EU, regardless of the risk category that the country or the region the products are coming from will be. All countries, including countries considered at high risk of deforestation, will be able to continue to sell their commodities on the EU market, provided that the operators can demonstrate that those commodities, as I said, are deforestation-free and legal. And great importance has been given to the external dimension of the regulation, both in its design stage and currently in the implementation phase. The European Commission has reached out to its trade partners already in the very early stage of the design, bilaterally or in the WTO. We organized information sessions in the WTO. And as we speak now, we're working on the implementation and, for instance, developing clear and easy to understand guidance to facilitate compliance and the sharing of best practices. But the climate challenge is inherently global. And as long as levels of ambition differ at global level, there is a risk of carbon leakage. That's why the EU adopted the carbon border adjustment mechanism. And since the Commission announced that it was working on CBAM, the issue of carbon leakage has gained traction around the world. Third countries like Canada and Japan may follow us in our ambition to introduce similar instruments. We are committed to working closely with our trade partners to make sure that CBAM works in an open and fair manner in full compliance with WTO rules. The phase-in of CBAM will be gradual, and during this transition period, we will continue to work together with industry and our partner countries to increase our mutual understanding of the instrument, to find synergies wherever possible, and to promote effective methods of decarbonization globally. And we hope CBAM will encourage third country producers to reduce the carbon content of their product. As I mentioned, we are developing those autonomous measures in full transparency. CBAM was discussed bilaterally with EU's trading partners and is being discussed as we move into the implementation phase and in the WTO. For instance, we are presenting next week as the WTO Green Week. We have two sessions, one on CBAM and one on deforestation, where we will be presenting again these proposals and hearing our trade partners' concerns and requests for further cooperation. The Green Deal outlines the Commission's commitment to the transformation of our global value chain. And due diligence can be an important and effective tool for implementing these goals. Due diligence is at the core of the deforestation regulation, but it is also at the core of the Corporate Sustainable Due Diligence Directive, which aims at fostering sustainable and responsible corporate behavior and to anchor human rights and environmental considerations in companies' operations and corporate governance. The proposal sets out a corporate due diligence duty to identify, prevent, and mitigate, as well as bring to an end minimize and account for adverse human rights and environmental impacts on the company's own operation, its subsidiaries, and their value chain. CSDDD and deforestation regulation are complementary. The CSDDD proposal will establish a common denominator for large companies, irrespective of their industry sector. So I understand I have just 2 minutes left. So let me just repeat that as we move towards the implementation of these regulations, we will continue to engage with our trading partners through outreach and awareness raising to ensure that the measures adopted are well understood. We will be, wherever possible, we intend to develop supportive information tools like information platforms, frequently asked questions, etc., and tools to facilitate the implementation of and compliance with the regulation. The EU is committed to strengthening this, as Stuart mentioned, by the way. I should underline that the EU is committed to strengthening the sustainability of trade policy. And the EU's network of trade agreement will facilitate trade in green goods, services, and investment. Trade and sustainable development chapter require, for instance, the effective implementation of various agreements. And the EU Commission aims to include the respect of Paris Agreement as an essential element in future trade agreements. Just as I have just 1 minute left, I will just highlight that we're also playing a leading role multilaterally by pushing for environment and climate to be high on the WTO's agenda. This is done in the WTO, but also in plurilateral settings. For instance, in January 23, together with a diverse group of trade ministers, we launched a coalition of trade ministers on climate, the first ministerial level global forum dedicated to trade, climate, and sustainable development issues. So we are heartened, generally speaking, to see the increasing engagement of our trade partners on climate, trade, and environment. And we support the reinforcement of the deliberation on global environmental challenges in WTO. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Salat, for this interesting overview, and it is really a pleasure to see the EU working and embedding sustainability within its trade policy, either in multilateral or bilateral agreements, but also, of course, as a driver of any autonomous measures that might be necessary. I would like to quickly reflect on the fact that and it is also very assuring to see this common understanding with the European Commission that the final objective of autonomous measures or greening sustainable trade is not to clean up EU supply chains, but it really is expanding to account, the EU is expanding its policies to account for its actual impact beyond the EU. So you mentioned the EU deforestation regulation, and I saw a question here in the chat that we might try to address afterwards, but also the CBAM instrument. And of course, this means that the EU needs to work strongly with business partners beyond the EU, with the most important sourcing regions. We will discuss this later. To ensure that that the implementation of EU legislation is understood and is coherent with any local legislative frameworks. You also mentioned due diligence and the alignment with international standards, which is a core message for amfori. And important also to say that within international due diligence standards, a core element of it is collaboration in the supply chain, and this is what we are addressing today. So moving forward, the next presentation will especially address this point. So it will be about capacity building and support for not only EU companies, but also their business partners overseas. And with this, I would like to give a warm welcome to Dominique Barria, Services Project Manager at amfori, who will talk about amfori's work in building capacity amongst those actors. Dominique, please go ahead.
Thank you, Amanda. Good morning, everyone. And it's my pleasure today to share with you how our association is building tools to reflect on the EU Green Deal and link or support our members in how they can best implement and meet their requirements within the deadlines. Today, I would like to share the program that we set up to support our members in the supply chain. And before going deeper into the capacity building program to build the skills, I would like just briefly to set the scene of our initiative called BEPI, the Business Environmental Performance Initiative. And a few numbers, as you might know, this initiative was built 10 years ago, nearly 10 years ago in 2014. And at the end of 2022, we launched a new version of the BPI with additional training material and tools. The initiative today, the BPI initiative, counts more than 590 members, active members, mostly spread in 27 countries. And what we call business partner, the producers in their supply chain, we have around 7,500 today, spread in more than 70 countries. The main sourcing markets that we will address in the tools that we develop are China, Bangladesh, India, Turkey, Vietnam, but of course we have also activities in other countries. And sectors, we have more than 25 sectors, the main sectors being textile, footwear, leather, and then we have electronics, electrics, and food and agriculture. So this explains all across the countries and the supply chain, the different tiers in the supply chain is one challenge that we address also gradually within the training program that we propose to our members and their supply chain. This involves several stakeholders, and as you rightly said, Amanda and our speakers before, collaboration is a key element in the rolling out of this program. Our capacity building model is based on instructor-led trainings and on demand, and I will explain later what we mean by on demand. We have a portfolio of trainings that we develop based on the different regulations that come and the expectation that are on our members and business partners. We develop these training portfolio and propose these trainings both in online format and face-to-face sessions. You mentioned earlier the pandemic. Pandemic also changed a lot the way we interact with our members and their business partners, because we propose also a lot of training material, either online or e-learning, so that they can also follow the different program remotely and address different countries. The major audiences will be, of course, members and the business partners. And here I would like to stress the importance of collaboration again, because our system is not only addressing business partners, but also the members that will interact closely with their supply chain. The access to the trainings is facilitated through our tool, our LMS tool called the Amfori Academy, where our members and their supply chain can find material in different format, as I said earlier, and access freely. I would like also to stress the importance of the access free of charge to all these trainings. This is part of the package that we offer to our members and their supply chain. And all these material is translated in different languages, of course, covering the major sourcing markets, which we showed earlier, Chinese, Bangla, Turkish, Vietnamese, but we have also material in Spanish, and for members in French, German, and Spanish. Next slide, please. Yeah. Before sharing with you the content of these trainings, just wanted to give you a brief description of the framework. When we are developing training material, we want to make sure that the audience, be it members or supply chain or their supply chain, have bring awareness to the topic. Why are we doing these? Why do we need to embark in this journey? What are the benefits? Understanding the concept. And what here we link closely to the double materiality concept. How does this affect, how these environmental changes do affect my business, and understand how our members' business can affect the environment, have a positive or negative impact. And then, of course, how to mitigate the risks at their level and at their production site level, the supply chain. And finally, in the whole overall BPI journey, how we can integrate the different topics that it will address. Next slide, please. The learning journey is closely linked to the amfori BPI journeys for members and BPs, and that are also linked to the OECD guidelines. We will have at the member side the materiality assessment, defining what environmental areas are material to our members, and get internal buy-in. As I said earlier, if we don't have awareness, we don't bring awareness at the first stage, is difficult to embark and understand why they are doing these. The supply chain mapping is where the members will map their supply chain, create visibility and access beyond tier 1. Then we have a very important step, which is the risk assessment, analyzing the self-assessment result of their production site and map against the risk element. The improvement activity is where our members will select the producer based on the potential risk or low performance, identify and assign improvement activities. And finally, the monitor and reporting the progress, track and encouraging their business partner progress, and assess the maturity of their supply chain. And when we see here in this slide that the business partner journey is closely linked to our member journey, and again, we can see clearly that the collaboration is a key element here, especially on the risk assessment step, where the production side will closely interact with our members. Next slide, please. Once we have set the scene of the, would say, the members and BP journey, we can, of course, relate these or learning and capacity building portfolio directly to these steps, where we have developed concrete material to support our members through all these steps. This is what we call here the different topics that we have developed in different format, online, e-learnings and face-to-face, and that we can see here the topics called Getting Started with BPI, where we will again set the scene and go through the basics, the foundation, materiality for our members, understanding where the risks are, and improvement activities. And for the BPs, of course, we'll also address the introduction to the BPI, and then the risk assessment and mitigation phase, which are crucial. And finally, we'll come to the topical, what we call topical training. These are trainings that we developed based on the launch of the new version of our system last year, and are relating to specific topics in an environmental area, which we will outline in the next slide, please. And they are closely linked to our assessment form, which is constituted of 8 environmental performance areas that you see here. Our members and business partners are invited to follow these during the risk assessment, to follow the different with the key indicators and identify where specific risks will lie. Based on this assessment, they will then focus on the specific session that we offer them. Next slide. And here we can see the summary of all the portfolio, the program that we propose to our 2 audiences, the members and the business partners. As I said earlier, we have the materiality, the introduction to BPI, risk assessment, improvement activity, and also as part of a partnership that we have with the ZDHC, our members can also have access to the ZDHC Open Supplier Hub and follow the chemical management program there. The business partner will, in addition to the same topics developed for our members, but at the level, we adapt, of course, the material to the specific audience. They will have all the different sessions related to the performance areas. So you can go from environmental management systems, which are the core, I would say, the starting point. And then you will have sessions on energy and climate, emissions to air, etc. You can see on the slide.
Dominic, apologies for jumping in, but I know that there's very interesting points that you will address. So just kind reminder
Yes,
to
just
wrap up in 1
finalizing.
minute.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, I'm just finalizing the outline of these offering. So the overview of the trainings that we delivered of the last 6 months since we launched the new version of the BPI. You can see on both sides what we delivered, the topics delivered for the members and the business partners, and just wanted to outline here that these trainings were delivered in China and Bangladesh so far, and that we are going to further develop trainings for our business partners in Turkey and in Vietnam in the coming months, and India. Just to close and to wrap up with this session, of course, one of our major role and mission here is to bring impact through these trainings, and we try to measure. We measure the impact through feedback surveys that we do. We conduct also impact assessment that we conducted 3 years ago, and the impact assessment showed clearly that the learners, the trainings brought improvement in the learners' experience, mainly in policy changes, business process, behavioral changes, and the equipment and facility upgrade. So we continue. That's our, I would say, our major goal for the future, to continue making sure that learnings and creating and building up skills will bring additional impact in the supply chain performance. And finally, to close this session, and thank you for your attention. Sorry for the timing issues. We just try to like to enhance here and highlight that our system, BPI system, is not a certification scheme, that we want to bring the attention on capacity building activities, because that's what we believe will bring more impact for our members and their supply chain. We are not a product label and one of process, because we believe that continuous improvement will bring changes over time. And of course, our system is not only for business partners. We want to enhance collaboration and improvement activities over time through a scalable, flexible system. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Dominique, for this in-depth presentation and for showing some impact numbers. We keep hearing about collaboration in the supply chain, collective approach to addressing risks, but how is really what we're trying to discuss today. So it's good that you talked about impact, and it's good that you talked about continuous improvement, and particularly about the ways in which the trainings and the system are designed to be accessible by different partners, also remotely, and following the double materiality logic, which is at the end what is required at the EU level. So now I would like to pass the floor to two special speakers that will join us today from the private sector, who will talk more about their own experience addressing those risks in the supply chain and supporting each other to build this awareness and capacity that is needed to drive the ecological transition. We will start with Beatriz Bayo González, CSR Director at Mango, all the way from Spain. Beatriz, please go ahead.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Amanda, for your presentation and for the invitation. It's my pleasure to be here, and it's always great to stop our office activity for a while and invest some time for reflection. Let me explain a bit about my 3 slides. I think Dominic's presentation has been the perfect introduction to my PowerPoint. I will give the practical vision on what she was explaining. I decided to focus it on the building capacity since in my opinion, although it may sound like a bit redundant, I can assure you that after so many years working on sustainability and visiting factories and talking to suppliers in the different sourcing countries we have, I can conclude that the lack of information is the main concern and the biggest challenge that we have relating to managing responsible business. Information understood as training and knowledge. Many times we find that we are asking suppliers many things, many emails involved, and we don't have the answer we expect. I can assure you that this is not because they are not willing to cooperate, but on the contrary, because most of the times they don't have the tools to answer as the brands expect. If we want the transition towards a green industry, I would say that this is the first step to start with. So that's why I considered capacity building as a crucial issue. I would like to share some insights with you about how we are managing and facing this important issue in Mango. As I mentioned, no, Amanda, please, previous one. Yeah. Previous slide, please. Yeah, just a bit small comment. As I mentioned, encouraging capacity building along the supply chain raises many advantages. Why? Which is the purpose for considered training important for the supply chain? I would say that improving conditions and raise awareness about aspects related to environment and human rights issues in the value chain, we can improve sustainability worldwide. And the most important thing for me is raise awareness. In sustainability departments, our daily routine is that, but we must be conscious that from the perspective of production centers, for example, the priority may be different. It's quite logical. So it is our role and in our own interest as well to work on that awareness. This would be the first step. Secondly, we as brands need to give answer to the new legislation which is coming on. And I would say that in most of them, if not all of them, the supply chain is directly involved. If we talk about climate and reduction objectives, they are because all of us are part of the carbon emissions. If we talk about plastics, if we talk about textile wastes, deforestation regulation that was mentioned before, even the green claims draft, which is EU is working right now, and of course the due diligence on human rights and climate impact. This is, by the way, one of the points where Mango finds much support from amfori, how to deal with the due diligence approach towards our supply chain in all moments. And finally, we think this is crucial because we are the main players on this green transition to more efficient business models. And we cannot do it as individuals agents. I think that to be sure of the success and to give answer to the emergency, we need to work collectively and together. It was mentioned by Stuart in his introduction before. Next slide, please. Yeah, so how is Mango working on that? Which is this practical vision I want to share with you. Since many years till the pandemic, we have been visiting different countries, gathering all suppliers in that country for 2 days as a perfect meeting point to establish a direct dialogue with them and discuss mainly about Mango internal procedures. As I told before, we write many emails asking for many things, many different requirements from many different departments within the company. And that's why it's very nice for, from time to time to put faces on that emails, right? If we want to get the right answer and the right reaction from suppliers, we need to give them the right tools. Because in my opinion, they have the right to know. If, for example, we are doing many efforts in mapping our chain before beyond tier 1, for example, we really need them aligned with this goal. But I would say that above all, this session is a win-win relationship, and this is the chance for them to find their respective synergies. It is really awesome to check that they are very grateful and excited to share their good practices with those who, at the end, they are the competitors. So for me, these training sessions have been highly valued by both parties, and it is in our roadmap to go on with this project. Also, I would like to highlight that amfori team local representative has been invited to these trainings. This is also the chance to know more about amfori and the advantages they can get as members. No? For example, I would like to mention Natasha in India, or Muri in Turkey, or Joyce Yolanda in China. We are coming back to these sessions. Last year, I remember we were in Bangladesh for the trainings, and this year we expect to do in some more countries. Another format for these trainings is the vendor summit. Is mainly online. Some of them came physically to our headquarters, and it was held in March. Also to inform the suppliers about the projects that they play an important role. This is also involving the suppliers in the company's value chain, and the key projects are explained there, and also our main goals, because we also had the participation of our CEO. So this want to reflect the important feature that we want to give to this training and to these sessions. And also amfori team, 3 representatives of amfori team join us and give very interesting insights about amfori platforms and services. Next slide, please, Amanda. Okay, so another way how we perform this capacity building, or this creation of capacity, is working collectively with our partners. And of course, amfori is one of the most important we have. We are members of this association since 2017. And I would like to highlight the 2 platforms which are the main support for our internal management of the supply chain. BSCI, of course. Honestly speaking, I think it was the main reason for Mango to join amfori. For us, it is essential that a key strategy to join efforts with the rest of the brands to avoid, first of all, audit fatigue, and to join efforts and resources to work aligned in the same direction, looking for the improvement of the social and labor performance in our supply chains. And as mentioned before, improving also our sector in a global way. It is our main tool to mitigate, to prevent, and remediate as per the due diligence we have been developing along the years requires. BAPI, we are not as much engaged with BAPI as we are with BSCI, but it has been really already introduced the great updating to the tool that amfori team has performed, and it has been introduced to our environmental team, and it may result very interesting, especially in the performance on climate, which is one of the most emergency actions that we must implement, and we are implementing right now in Mango. Also, all the material that we can find in the academy is in different languages, which is really helpful to make it easier. And also multiple webinars on hot topics, they are very useful as well. I would like to highlight the local team support to us and to amfori local team to our suppliers and factories in the different countries. I think, in my opinion, is one of the strengths in amfori. We always feel supported and accompanied by them, whatever the issue is. And this is not easy. For the brand, is really grateful to be understood and accompanied. For example, the assessment on the risk of the supply chain is a great help to create our own strategy as a brand, and in our roadmap of projects focused on the improvement of the environmental and social performance along the supply chain as well. And finally, this amfori Speak for Change program, it was launched a few months ago, and it allows the workers in the supply chain to express their complaints when other procedures that we were providing were not satisfactory enough to remedy. So, I mean, we all know that social audits have some limitations and need to be complemented with some other resources, and it was the perfect one. Through this participation, we have been participating in the pilot, and it has been very successful, working with another brand involved in the factories. And I think the idea is to be expanded to some other countries. And for the brands, it gives us the ingredients to implement these communication services, and the chance to be in contact with the workers' expectations. I think is very necessary to deal with, and we have found the perfect panel. And also, the Operating in Challenging Context report, I would like to highlight as well, as it is a very good guide for us. It was really helpful for us in some special moments that we were facing in some countries with difficult and complicated situations. So that's all. Hopefully, my experience in our partnership with amfori has been an inspiration for more companies, and of course, the perfect framework to move forward in this transition. Thank you very much, Amanda. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Beatriz, for taking the time to join us today and for this presentation, for taking the conversation on the ground, on the practical level. At the end of the day, any piece of legislation or legislative framework can only work as long as it works in practice. So it is very important to keep this exchange. And I think Mango gives a very good example of what we're trying to promote also from amfori, that especially when we talk about due diligence, we're not expecting companies to do everything right from the start, but really to build capacity and to have this continuous improvement along the way. And just one thing that I would like to highlight is Mango's approach to working with your partners and to try to fit in their shoes and understand the reasons why they might reply or not, and what tools they might need to respond to expectations, especially since they received many requests from their clients, and now with as we call it, the legislative tsunami, for good reasons, but it will pose certainly some complexities for them. So thank you very much, Beatriz. And now I would like to move the conversation to Turkey. So we will have Emel Kaya from İBİSLER Textil, who will explain about, she will explain their experience in the trainings, collaboration with clients, and also within the context of amfori. Emel, I'm really looking forward to your insights, and thank you again for joining us today.
Hi everyone, and I would really like to thank you for this invitation as a speaker and give us a chance to introduce our factory and its processes, especially in environmental sides. Briefly, who am I? I'm an environmental engineering, and I'm master degree of environmental engineering and health and safety engineer. Degree is good safety consultant, and I'm responsible of the social compliance and sustainable department of İBİSLER Textile. I have lots of experiences in various processes in textile industry for 10 years, and now I'm leading social compliance processes of İBİSLER Textile since 2020. Management of supply chain within sustainable and social compliance. Who is İBİSLER Textile? İBİSLER Textile, established in 2028, is a company dedicated to the development and manufacturing of garments in circular knitted fabrics. In our facilities, we mainly produce t-shirts, tops, skirts, sweatshirts, dresses, etc. And also we have 4 main fabrics. One fabrics in Istanbul and headquarters, and 2 factories are brands in Düzce and in Ordu. And the other office in brands, marketing office, we can use in this. We are 700 people producing our sustainable products in Istanbul headquarters and Düzce and Ordu branches, with capacity 1.2 and 1.5 million pieces per monthly. We export 100,000 our products. Next slide, please. Next slide, we can go. Next slide. And you can see all our business partners from around Europe, including France, Spain, Poland, Italy. Next slide. What are the most important skills that we have learned in this journey with BEPI process? First of all, we have reached our sustainable product certificates goals in 2021. Also, you can see our certificates: Global Organic Textile Standards, Recycle Standards, and Ecotex. With Ecotex certificate, we control of harmful chemicals in products content has become essentially for every factory in the supply chain. Next slide. The declaration of all chemicals used in our company was also declared to the Ministry of Environment and Urbanization platform in accordance with the laws of Turkey. Hereby, the MSTS or STS, all chemicals were collected and the damage they caused the environment was calculated, excluded out of scope by the degree of harmfulness. And this has taken us to control the data of all chemicals both for us and other suppliers. Next slide. The other point of we learned with BEPI process this journey. We had the opportunity to monitor our suppliers on the BSCI platform and BEPI platform. Also, you can see our supply chain factories. With a detailed risk assessment questionnaire in BEPI system, we had the opportunity to monitor consumption of natural resource values per piece. We have begun to collect at our headquarters, branches, and suppliers of a natural resource consumption data per piece of product since 2021. Next slide, please. The other point of, we thought that what can we do this journey with BEPI process? Using renewable natural resources. We established a new branch in Ordu 2022. We installed a solar energy system in our Ordu branch. By the September 2023, we will have obtained 100% of our electricity from natural sources. We will use 60% of energy gains in our 3 factories and sell 40% of it to the grids. The other point of this journey with BEPI process, we use the tables to monitor resources consumption. All headquarters, all our 2 branches, and all supply chains, we use these tables to control their consumptions. Next slide, please. The other point of also as a company, we have to follow our local law and regulation. That reason, we have obtained our zero waste certificate, showing that we are all hazardous and non-hazardous wastes separately at the source. Also, we had zero waste certificate approved by the Ministry of Environment, Urbanization and Climate Change. Next slide, please. The other point of the biodegradable wastes, and we thought this period of what can we do to our biodegradable wastes, and we found reducing biodegradable. It comes food for the animals that we waste an average of 8 to 10 kilograms per day. By delivering the biodegradable waste from the kitchen in our production facilities in Istanbul to the animal shelter nearby, we have ensured that our wastes are reduced and that these wastes become food for our animal friends. What the BEPI process taught us was to strive to make them more useful while reducing these wastes. Next slide, please. The other point of our social responsibility projects. Vocational high school's textile department students were given process training in 2022. And this year, we will want to give the same trainings. The other slide, please. The other point to us, I think we are not alone in this journey. We are a big family in our company. Important department is assurance team, quality assurance team, I think, because of they are all the time work site and they can also see what are they doing in our factory, in our supply chain. Our training for our quality assurance team has increased. In this way, our team checked our suppliers during their visits and increased sustainable awarenesses. The other slide, please. With amfori BEPI, what we learned. We have reduced the wastes that we have generated. We compared our total amount of hazardous and preventive waste at the end of the year. We separated our recyclable and non-hazardous wastes mixed with domestic waste at the production site. We had the opportunity to learn the amount of natural resources consumed per piece by following the natural resource consumption in terms of water, natural gas, electricity, fuels annually. We have learned to question and pre-control the harmful effects given or to be given to the environment. Next slide, please. With the amfori BEPI process, before these days, we don't do anything about the soil pollution. And with the BEPI process, we think that what can we do about the soil pollution? Our awarenesses on soil pollution has increased. We requested an audit from the Ministry of Environment and Urbanization to determine our possible impacts. We had an audit and it was determined that we didn't have any activities that polluted the soil. Also, you can see the audit topics as well. Next slide, please. You can see the document. Also, the document is Turkish, but you can see in the box approved by the Ministry about soil pollution. Next slide, please. Conclusion. Sustainable production is important in the world. BEPI prepares the infrastructure for this process with the risk assessment part. While the production processes progress sustainably, the brands started to look for companies that started this environmental values in our production process. We have increased our orders. We didn't produce sustainable products 3 years ago, but now we have mainly switched our production into sustainable products. That's enough. If you have any question, I will answer to you.
Thank you very much, Emel, for this very comprehensive overview of all the activities and learnings along your environmental work. I know that you're also very active on the social side, but today we were focusing more on the E of ESG, and particularly for providing insights on your actions to reduce and segregate waste, and also on your decarbonization efforts. We know that segregation of waste is super important for the whole circular economy process. This is being targeted at the moment by the Eco-Design Directive at the EU. And very importantly, I think you made a remark in the end. You spoke about how you've integrated through the learning process, environmental values along the whole production process. And this is very important because circularity and reduction of environmental risks don't occur only in one part of the supply chain or at the end. It needs to go hand in hand with each production stage from the very beginning of the design phase. It's very nice to see how active you are in this field. But I won't expand longer. We can move on to our panel discussion now. We have 17 minutes. So I will jump right into it. And I would like to alter the planned order a little bit. So I thought we could maybe start with you, Emel, if that's okay for you, with the first question.
It's okay.
Super. So we were talking about skills, and you've mentioned what you have learned and also the ways that you're working with your quality assurance department to build further awareness with your suppliers. And my question to you is, looking into the future and the transition process that you mentioned, what skills would you like to improve further? And what sort of support do you think you might need to develop them?
Okay. Since I'm an environmental engineer, I don't have any problems with process adaptation. However, this process may not always be managed by environmental engineers in the other factories. In Turkey, I don't know the other countries, but in Turkey it's like this. So the factories should recruit environmental engineers rather than seeing them as an extra cost, unfortunately. Me and my company attend amfori BEPI trainings, but all factories should join them. And amfori may give support to increase the number of trainings for business partners. Everyone has to pay for trainings for the carbon footprints calculation. Which is on the agenda right now, myself included, unfortunately. There are businesses that see economic costs, but they have to adapt to the process. For those who manage this process in companies, training can be given for specific topics. For example, carbon footprints calculation, water footprints calculation, maybe life scale analysis, etc. I think.
Thank you, Mel. That's very well understood. And indeed, decarbonization of the supply chain is a very hot topic at the moment that we are working on. So
Thank you so much.
We would fully agree. But let me continue the conversation. And I have a question for Mango, actually, which was partially answered in your presentation, Beatriz.
Really? Mm-hmm.
But maybe you could dive a little bit deeper into what are the main challenges that, or if there's any, that you've experienced when working with your business partners. Okay. And maybe you could share a piece of advice with other companies watching us today on how they could facilitate this.
Thank you, Amanda, for the question. Is when dealing with our supply chain as a daily basis that we are doing in our department is well, we face many different situations with them, and especially if we are willing to move forward a more sustainable and responsible value chain. I think we face different situations, and we are looking always for more technical skills, which from my perspective is one of the main challenges. I mean, we want to move fast, but sometimes our sector maybe is not prepared enough to move forward at the same time that we are willing to. I mean, for example, we are doing great efforts with our suppliers in trying to find more sustainable fibers instead of conventional fibers. And it seems easy, but it's not that easy, even if we want to move to measuring our impact on that aspect as well. So yes, I think that sometimes technical skills is one of the biggest challenges. For example, if we are talking about managing decarbonization, all our carbon emissions goals that we have, and we need our supply chain to substitute the conventional boilers, cool boilers, for example, to avoid them, and start using green energy sources, for example. This may be a hard point for many of them, and even more depending on the countries that we are talking about. I mean, the Green Deal is this package of policies to be more efficient and to be more competitive, no? That should not be a pain. So I think this insists that we need to continue learning together and creating these skills together, because these better skills for them at the end is better also for the companies.
Thank you very much, Beatriz. That's clear. And of course, we have the well, not the issue, but let's call it opportunity of creating more skills. And then on the other hand, there's the physical, the issue of physical assets that's just right. Require investment, and that's right. And I think you made a very interesting point, which is not the main focus of today, but I think it's good that you mentioned it. It's on the readiness of the sector, and right. You were super right. Sometimes the materials or the technology doesn't exist yet, and this
it's
needs
very
to be
basic, but it's really the reality that we are facing many times with many
absolutely.
Topics and in many strategies that we want to move faster, and sometimes we find these stoppers, and sometimes unexpected. Yeah, I think this is a great opportunity to work on together within the sector and within the industry. Yeah.
Absolutely. And I will, talking about this, I think this is the perfect setting to throw the next question, and I will do it in the opposite order. So Stuart, if you are with us, I would like to hear your reflection on this, and perhaps tell us a bit more on how you think that sustainable trade can support the ecological transition. And also what potential do you think that is untapped? How could, European policy be strengthened to again, support the green transition?
Well, I think I touched on it slightly in my presentation. Of course, it was a very general presentation, and for the trade policy specifically, I think that there is still this incentive for sourcing countries to adapt their methods, improve their methods to meet the requirements within the TSG chapters. And the incentive is the increased trade that will develop as a result of those commitments being met, and as a result of the trade agreement itself. Because the trade agreement will reduce duties to zero. Usually well over 90% of tariff lines will be reduced to zero immediately. with more so-called sensitive products, there could be a slide in scale. And you can see just through trade levels, for example, the most recent one was Vietnam, that imports into the EU from those countries rise very quickly because there's a big incentive for EU companies to go to those countries. But at the same time, there's this commitment from the sourcing country to meet the requirements within the TSG chapters, not just social, but environmental. So there should be that incentive there for them to meet those requirements to avoid the risk that those preferences will disappear. But that's just from the pure trade angle. But as I said also in my presentation, there should be a climate change incentive as well. Because if you don't adapt to the changing climate, then you're going to come into problems when the climate does change. And I use the example of water usage. If you don't improve your conditions or manufacturing conditions to reduce the amount of water, when there is less water in the future, as there might very well be, you're going to have a problem. And this applies for highly developed countries and highly developed manufacturing processes, as well as countries from least developed countries or lesser developed countries where a lot of our products come from. So I'm not just direct in this at sourcing countries, but at any company.
Thank you very much, Stuart, for expanding on your presentation. You've touched on those points before, and I think you also made an interesting remark that it's at the end of the day improving production processes and activities is good for everyone. I mean, when we look at environmental risk, we tend to look at a longer lifespan of impact. And of course, we have climate change at the corner. Climate change impacts, well, they've already started. We see droughts and floodings all around. And of course, adapting your production process can serve, I mean, Beatriz already mentioned this, it requires significant investment, but over the long term, that can help the factories to prevent environmental and other risks and potentially production disruptions. If we're talking about water scarcity or resource scarcity, it's important to be, let's say, future-proof. And another point that I already mentioned at the beginning, but I believe is fully understood, but nonetheless, I think it's important, is that indeed, as you said, Stuart, trade policy, you talked about trade policy from a purely trade perspective, but then Ms. Salard also mentioned autonomous measures. And of course, ideally, we're looking at an ecosystem that can enable the transition, and both set of, let's say, initiatives need to work together to incentivize development on the one hand, and on the other hand to promote sustainable practices, again, not only in Europe, but also outside of the EU. And with that, I would like to turn to Ms. Salard itself. I would like to hear if you have any remarks on what is being discussed, and also how you see the EU policy contributing to the transition. Ms. Salar, excuse me, I think there's an audio issue. Nope. Mm-mm.
Does it work better this way?
Perfect. Well done.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Oh my God. The beauties of technology. Sorry. Sorry. So can you come back to your question?
Sure, of course. So I was just to know if you had any reflections on what Stuart mentioned, and also how you see generally the EU trade policy contributing to the green transition.
Well, I think that was part indeed of my presentation, as much as from Stuart's very interesting presentation, both not only on which commitments we have taken, but also the challenges we are facing. So I think we're all committed to the green transition. The question is how we do it, and how do we do it together. That's why from the EU perspective, we have taken both this approach of taking autonomous measures to change our production approaches to address the green transition, but production and consumption approaches. And we are negotiating closely with our trade partners to do that in a cooperative way. One of the challenges is indeed that climate change is inherently global. You cannot take measures that stop at your border. You have to start by working on your core challenges, but you have to take into account that we are in a global world, and therefore have to work with our trade partners in addressing these challenges. And that's where all the bilateral discussions, but also the plurilateral meetings and the discussions in international fora like the WTO are core.
Thank you, Ms. Salar. Indeed, of ultimate importance to address collaboration through different channels, also via WTO discussions, and well noted and on the work that the Commission is currently doing with regards to the deforestation regulation and coordinating with partners also bilaterally and multilaterally. I have one question that was asked by Maria Francisca Garrido. She asked, you saw it. So
yeah, indeed. And I'm sorry, we're already at the end of this extremely interesting panel, but in any case, I have to step out in 1 minute because I have another meeting. So I'm trying to quickly answer that question. Indeed, the regulation establishes strict traceability requirements. Operators are required to provide precise geolocation information on the plot of land where the commodities have been grown. This geolocation coordinate can be done via different tools. There are several digital applications, free to use digital applications. This is left to the appreciation of the operators. What the regulation requires is that the operators trace the product back to the plot of origin. How they do it will depend on what they consider necessary in the case of their product. That will depend a lot on the global value chain of the product. For instance, for products traded in bulk, operators will need to ensure that all plots of land involved in the shipment are identified. We know that there are a number of public and private schemes that can be used to provide to enforce that provide traceability information. and they can be used by operators to supply the information, provided that the schemes provide the information that is specifically required in the regulation. So there is not one answer to the question. It's for the operators to, depending on the global value chain of the product, to provide that traceability. And I'm very sorry, but I will have to thank you again for this extremely useful seminar, but I have to move out. But I have another meeting starting now.
Of course, it is our pleasure hosting you, and we hope to continue our collaboration in the future.
Thank you again.
Beatriz, I know that you need to jump off super soon. I thought there was an interesting question that would be for you in the chat. So it says, are fashion brands demanding these optimizations to be accepted as supplier, and or do they pay a minimum price?
Yeah, very good question. That would be another seminar talking about it, really. It's very extensive issue, but it's right. It's all these requirements that we are expecting from our suppliers. It has a value, of course, and it has an impact as well of their financial and their businesses. So we are very conscious of that. We think that it's very important for them to find these requirements and these improvements, like opportunities for a competitive perspective, I would say, no? And of course, this is something that we are leading, and we are working on our responsible purchasing practices. This is also a very necessary tool to work with our suppliers, and also within our company with the buying departments as well, of course.
Thank you very much, Beatriz. And I won't hold anyone for longer in the session. We've reached the end of our schedule. So thank you very much, everyone, for contributing. And a final message to all the participants here. We know the legislations are coming. We know expectations both on the consumer but also investment side and regulator side are increasing. Over the long term and the mid-term, companies that take the time and resources to build capacity in the supply chain, to know where their products come from and to understand how the production process works, will be more future-proofed to potential risks, not only in the legislation side, but also climate change and other potential risks. So we really encourage you to increase collaboration. You don't need to do it alone. You can collaborate with of course, with the Spanish, but also join sectorial initiatives. You can try to find other colleagues in the same industry and share best practices and advice. So thank you very much, everyone, for joining today. I think it was an interesting discussion, and hopefully we will see each other very soon. Have a good day.
Thank you. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.